Men who instinctively take personal responsibility for themselves and their families eventually realize that being atomized, rootless cosmopolitans inhibits their ability to exercise their willpower. Male agency naturally leads into the creation of a patriarchy. Raise your sons to be strong, masculine and dominant. Raise your daughters to be soft, feminine and submissive. The bad behavior that we see for women today is simply a rebellion against men's failure to benevolently dominate them. The failure of Western society is a failure to maintain the patriarchy.
But the patriarchy is returning, and we're back for episode 18 of Patriarch Hour. I'm James Fox-Higgins, and I'm here as ever with Noah Revoy. How are you, Noah?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you. Just got back
Good
from
to see
3
you.
days camping with the kids. It is certainly an interesting experience to camp with small babies. It's
Yeah.
really a lot different, but, I at least I had them as mosquito bait, so I managed to completely avoid getting bitten, and, they got all of the bites. That's their introduction to the outdoors is 50 mosquito bites each.
Yes, well, I'm sorry to hear that on their behalf, but yeah, it is an interesting fact that mosquitoes prefer young blood and they prefer blondes. Did you know that?
Wow. Well, they're blonde and blue eyed, so I think that's why they got eaten up pretty well. It's good though. They really took it stoically. They didn't scratch the bites, and they didn't complain at all about them. So I was
Oh, well,
really
that's good.
grateful for that. Even Levi, he didn't say a thing. So yeah, they were quite happy. They enjoyed it. They found it very interesting. At one point, I said they were a little unhappy, and I said, "What is it that you're unhappy about? Do you miss home?" Yeah. What don't you like? This. And the little baby said
Yeah,
gestures like that. They
awesome.
say half a dozen words, and I think they were just tired. So we only took them for 2 days. That's a good first start, but it's important to let your kids experience some discomfort from an early age, so
Yeah.
that start to think less of discomfort. They start to worry less about it. It becomes something that they can handle easily.
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually just went camping myself with my boys, but on our own property. We've got 80 acres here in bushland. So, we don't need to deal with the plebeians out there in the world. We can just do it on our own plot. But we had a campfire, and my eldest son slept in his own tent, which was his choice. And that was great. But he did need me to sit outside the tent until he fell asleep. It was his first time. Although that's not entirely true. We did go camping with him once when he was, I think, 2. He was very little, and it was in my van, and that was an interesting experience out in Kangaroo Valley down west of southwest of Sydney. A beautiful place, but riddled with wombats. And I don't know if you have ever seen a wombat, but they are big, weird creatures. And one decided to come out and use my van as a scratching post. So in the middle of the night, I woke up to the van shaking like this, and I thought, "Oh no, we've got some burglars or something trying to get in." And I looked out, and it was a giant wombat. Massive, massive thing leaning against my van, scratching his back on it. But yeah, camping, it's good for the spirit. It seems a lot of people camping in this time. It's these middle seasons, aren't they, that are the best time to get out there, where it's not too hot, not too cold, autumn and spring.
Yeah, and I think too that a lot of people haven't been able to take expensive trips to foreign countries due to COVID, and
Mm.
they're spending time then in their own country. They're camping, they're doing things closer to them, more local, and I think that's actually a great trend. Spending less time on travel means, apparently, the personal debt of your average person in the U.S. and in some parts of Europe here, I haven't studied everywhere, has actually dropped in the last few months. Considering people have had less income, that's amazing. It goes to show how much money people were spending on eating out and on travel and on other non-essentials. And we that's why they can't afford things like children and other things often, is because they're spending money in the wrong place.
Well, there's this program that's been part of the whole bigger program of wanderlust. It's a very, very common affliction in people of our generation, and I know especially a lot of young women. It seems with Instagram accounts, make their whole life around traveling Europe as many times as they can, or traveling the States, or traveling everywhere they possibly can. And you talk about it in our intro that we hear every show here about the dangers of becoming a rootless cosmopolitan. Not only are we rootless when we are rooted in these foreign lands that our peoples have moved to, and we don't have this sort of ancestral connection that we traditionally had in Europe, but now people are so rootless that they often don't even allow themselves a permanent home, or they just shack up at their parents' place when they get back. But really, they see themselves as wandering people, as nomads who just want to get on the next plane to the next country. All that's finished now in this incredible year we've been in. Like, nobody can do that anymore. And people are getting seriously depressed about it. But for those of us who have families, as you're hearing now, we can innovate by camping locally, or camping very locally in my case, and spending time with our families. We're certainly not rootless, and although we don't live in the lands of our ancestral people, Noah and I, we are beginning our own nations with these families. And tonight's show is about how we as men, and how you as men, can be the rocks upon which your family and community rely. And I guess we'll get into the nitty gritty of it, Noah. How can we be the best rock upon which others may lean and stand in these tumultuous times?
Well, there's basically three main areas that I want to discuss tonight. It's how well we look after ourselves, how well we look after our families, and then what we can do to look after our community as well. And it's important that we start at the center and then we work our way out. We can't have a much of an effect on the world around us if we ourselves are full of chaos. And if we are easily moved and pushed around, our ability then to change the world in a way that we want it to be changed, in a way that's better, that's going to fit closer to our and our family's needs, is going to be very limited. And when we start with looking after ourselves, the idea of having a good diet and exercise and all of that is quite talked about amongst our community. A lot of people are really realizing after COVID that maintaining your health is important. Even though hardly anyone actually died from COVID, the people that did die are the people that were looking after their health, were the least interested in looking after their health. And it gave people a scare. They said, if COVID could cause this much trouble, killing very few people, what if a serious disease spread around? And so many people are not looking after their health. The European plagues, the early ones, killed so many people because they happened right after a period where people weren't eating right. Now, in this case, it was starvation. Today, it's over consumption of food and consumption of the wrong food. But they went through periods of starvation, sometimes for an entire generation, and then a plague hit. And that's why it wiped out, in some cases, half the population.
Yep.
That's devastating. Now, it may have had some long-term benefits in that it tended to wipe out the least successful, least capable people in society. However, imagine if that happened today and half the population of the world was wiped out. Would we be able to maintain civilization with the remaining half?
Not as we know it.
Yeah, people are thinking, I better look after my health. One way or the other, I'd like to be in the surviving half. And I don't believe that COVID's the last virus that's going to go around. I think either naturally or unnaturally, we're going to be facing more of this because it suits certain people's interests to keep us in a situation of fear and panic. Now, also, the individuals that had the most problems during COVID are the people that were barely hanging on pre-COVID.
Yeah.
This is where we get into the other part that's often neglected amongst, when men are talking, we often neglect this one issue, is emotional and mental health. So physical hygiene, if your friend is not demonstrating good physical hygiene, and I don't just mean cleaning himself, but I mean taking care of his health, making sure his body is as robust as it can be. Amongst men, we don't have much of a problem with saying, you're kind of getting tubby there, you need to work out, or maybe you should do some pull-ups, you're looking a little weak. But when it comes to emotional and mental health, it's often a taboo subject. And I think that this is because we've been propagandized to ignore that as men. Women have been told to extremely indulge their emotion, whereas men have been told not to have any. So we've been, instead of being balanced and healthy, we've been pushed into these two extremes. And it's left a lot of men with mental health issues. And COVID, not really the disease, but the government response to it, the lockdown, the isolation, has shown a lot of men how vulnerable they are. When you have a wife and children, and you have no friends, and you don't live with anybody, and you're in lockdown, you might not get physically touched for months on end. And this is terrible for your emotional health.
Yep. You've got to get that oxytocin. You're getting lots of it at the moment, aren't you, with your babies?
Yeah. Well, and you and I notice it because, we're talking to lots of different people, so we notice this. But you and I, our life didn't change that much due to COVID. We work from home, and it's
improved. It's been better for me. Yeah.
It's not been that much of a difference. And we've created a support structure that's robust enough to handle facing this. So many people don't have that. And, I want to address specifically the idea that men shouldn't have emotions. This is not psychologically healthy. This is not historically the norm. What it is it's a confusion by people who have very little control over their emotions. They have little agency.
Mm.
And because they have little agency, their solution to the problem is to try to suppress their emotions. However, emotions are kind of like the boiler on a steam engine. So the way a steam engine works is you have a fire under a boiler full of water. It makes pressure, and that pressure drives the steam engine. However, if you turn on the boiler, but you don't allow the steam engine to work, you don't allow the emotions to become available to you to do things with, the pressure will continue to build until it explodes. And so you'll see men who everyone says, well, he was such a quiet guy and he never said anything and I didn't think there was anything wrong with him, and suddenly he killed himself.
Yeah, or others, or others. You often hear that story about the people who go postal.
Yeah.
And I guess, the boilers often have a release valve as well, a pressure release valve. So it's not necessarily the case that when your emotions have built up to a point where they need to, move emotions, that energy in motion that we need to get going. You do need to, I think, as a man, have restraint and have some self-control and not be ruled by your emotions, but you do need a physical, I think, outlet for them. And exercise, especially heavy weightlifting, is a great way for men to regulate their own emotions and to give some motion to them, so that valve is released and the pressure goes back down. And I know for me that my mental health has significantly improved. Like, I haven't been anxious or stressed or worried since I've started lifting heavy weights every day and going for my edge, trying to find the edge and stay in it every day. And the more I do that, the more I just sort of cruise through the rest of the day quite happily. And as emotions come up in various situations, I'm able to detach from them a bit more and control them a bit more and act a bit more stoically, because they're not trapped inside me and building up to a point of explosion, but also I'm not letting them rule me.
Exactly. Well, and the ability to use emotions like energy, like fuel, means that actually there's not such a thing as a negative emotion. Now, this is kind of conflicts, because I'll talk often about people who have high neuroticism, and that's defined as being prone to negative emotions. And then I say there's no such a thing as negative emotions. It's hard because you have different definitions for different conversations. But
yeah, I don't think that's the best definition of neuroticism either. I think it's an oversimplification.
Yes, exactly. And to a large extent, it's not the neuroticism that people find objectionable. Highly neurotic men are very unattractive to women, and men tend to not want to be on their team. So, they don't get hired easily. They tend to have problems at work. They tend to have very few friends, and the friends they have tend to be highly neurotic like them.
For some reason, I like my women neurotic. I don't know why, but I've always found neurotic women attractive. It's weird.
Because neurotic women have high sensitivity to the needs of children.
That's true. Yeah.
If a woman is too unneurotic, she'll literally be sitting there looking at the crying baby and going, "Yeah, I don't care. No big deal.
that ain't gonna fly, woman."
I'll get around him when I get around to him. You want the woman that says, "Oh my God, is my baby stopped breathing?" in the middle of the night and pops up and checks them. That's the mother whose children survive in general. And, especially when times are bad, women need to be really on top of the infants. First year of life is very difficult for children. That's when kids die historically. And so the neurotic woman tended to be a better mother when she was with a man that was not neurotic, so he could balance her out. But with men that
to be that rock.
Yeah. With men, exactly. With men that are highly neurotic, it's not the neuroticism really that bothers people, because that's all happening in your head and nobody sees it. It's your outward displays of a lack of self-confidence, of fear in the face of danger. Now, it's perfectly fine to be afraid of danger. In fact, if you're not afraid of anything, you're probably stupid. You're going to
die.
You're gonna die. I go out to the ocean and I see these 15-meter waves, and I look at that and I go, "No, that's too big. I can't surf that. That's way too big. I'm going to wait till it comes down to some 5-meter waves. I'm very good at it." And that keeps me alive. And if I had no fear, I'd go, "Yeah, I'm going to try that," and then I'd be dead. Or maybe I'd be okay, but probably I'd be dead. And it's a risk not worth taking for the upside. The problem is that becomes, they display so much fear over things that they don't need to be afraid of, that it inhibits their control of themselves and their lives. And it undermines, and this is the worst part, it undermines the confidence of everyone around them.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. So with neurotic men, they really need to look after their mental and emotional health, and they need to understand how to channel their negative emotions into something positive. And they need to understand when they need to keep that in their head and when it's okay to let it out. And this is why it's important to have relationships with other men. You know, if you have good friendships where you can talk about your fears and your concerns, and you know, I will always mention this, and some man will say, I don't need to talk about my fears and concerns, blah blah blah, that's unmasculine. And it's, you know, fine, that's your option. But most men benefit tremendously from being part of a hierarchy, of a group where they can talk to someone. So for
Yes,
some
that's right.
people,
And when you're part of a group where you have enough camaraderie and brotherhood to be able to be somewhat vulnerable with your mates, you know, you'll often find that men share very similar fears, especially in these times of political unrest and turmoil in the world. And it's when you get on the same page as brothers and go, yeah, we're all afraid of the same thing, but maybe together we don't need to be so afraid. Maybe we can act as one, act in unison, and the threat is not so much. So that divide and conquer principle applies. If we as men divide ourselves apart and never confess the things that are worrying us, then we can never work together to be strong enough to stand up against them.
yeah, it's interesting you mentioned confession. Historically, for Christians, that was one of the ways that we confession wasn't just about where you'd sinned. A lot of the sins are not physical things you do. There are things that are not healthy in your psychology that you're confessing about. I envied so and so. I lusted after so and so's wife, whatever it was. And by confessing these things to another man, because it was to your priest, it was to the elder in your church or whatever, you had an opportunity to ask for help to deal with these problems that you had. And you would hopefully deal with them in this way, you know, perform this emotional hygiene, this health care for what's inside your head before you did something that destroyed your life. That was the objective. And this is why
to be redirected. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why, and often the men that tell me that they have absolutely no need to talk to other men about their emotions, then you'll see later they'll have a post about how self-destructive they are. And it's, you know, they're not conscious of their need. They have a need, they're not conscious of it. I believe we all have that need. You know, I say believe because I can't prove it in a scientific manner, but every man that I've ever met has benefited tremendously from open discussions about how he feels about things. And sometimes as a patriarch, it's not even about you benefiting. It's about having that discussion with other men so that they benefit from it.
Yeah, that's right. Often a leader type figure, an alpha in a hierarchy of men, will be the first one to admit his vulnerability to his men. Being an alpha is not always all about being staunch and tough and being the one that everyone can rely on. It's leading the way in your behavior as well. And this is a good thing for men to be honest with each other about these vulnerabilities and fears. And so, yeah, I think it's actually on the alphas in any group to lead the way in that regard as well.
Yeah. And with looking after ourselves, the last thing I wanted to mention that I think is important is looking after our spiritual health. Nowadays, just because you're going to a church doesn't mean your spiritual health is being taken into consideration. There's many churches today that are essentially secular talk groups. They're Oprah with a less skilled facilitator. And this is, you know, this is not masculine. This is why you'll often see churches are full of women. Often middle-aged and older women, because they have no one else to talk to, or they've driven everyone out of their lives, and they end up at one of these effeminate churches. This is not good for men especially, but your family is not going to get their spiritual needs fulfilled as well if you're in a church like that, and your family's going to go to the same church you go to. If you can't find a church near you that's fulfilling your spiritual needs, you may have to supplement with fulfilling them at home. And a lot of the people watching the show actually are atheists as well. Even though we talk a lot about what Christians need, there are a lot of atheists watching this show. And even if you're an atheist, you have a spiritual need. That's part of the psychological need of humans. It's not, and we're going to define this, it's not a need to worship. It's a need to be part of something that is bigger than you, that is transcendental, that is perhaps a bit mysterious and unexplained, and that will continue on long after you. And there are ways that you participate in that. You know, to a large extent, you walk outside on a pitch black night and you look up at the starry skies, and if you know, you're out in the wilderness, you take a deep breath, you open your hands up, you look up at the starry skies, and if you don't have a bit of a spiritual experience, maybe you're kind of dead inside. You know, do it a little longer, breathe a little deeper, and see if it.
And that basic spiritual experience that I think every living, breathing, beating heart, you know, red-blooded man has ever felt when looking at the stars, especially when you get out away from the cities and the light pollution and you see the magnificence of the cosmos, whether or not God is on your radar, that realization of how minuscule you are compared to all of creation. You know, compared to that cosmos, the greatness of all things, that's the transcendental right there, just to look at the massiveness of everything around you. And in a way, when you become that small, your problems and your fears and your worries become that small too, if you allow them to. So yeah, just that sense of awe for creation, whether or not you believe in the creator, is very important.
And I really love when I'm feeling that of, you know, you're tiny and the universe is huge. I love to make this contrast. I'm tiny, the universe is huge, and so are my problems. My problems are also tiny, and the universe's issues are huge, and over this massive time scale. When we talk about the universe, we talk in time scales of millions of years. Whereas when we're often thinking in our head in time scales of when's lunch, you know, when's our next meal, the limit of our thinking. It helps us too to realize that even though we're small, our contribution is essential, because there's no one is going to save us. We need the contribution of every man making a small contribution. The aggregate is what will make society stronger. And a lot of times we get, you know, this kind of hero confusion. Either we're going to be a hero, or we're going to find a hero, or we're going to suddenly, one big grand gesture is going to solve all of our problems. You know, it's time
for one re-election.
Yeah, one re-election, one civil war, one whatever happens to be. When the reality is, it's the little decisions we make every day in aggregate that are going to change the world. Not just in aggregate are going to change our life, but are going to ripple out and join up with the efforts that other men are going to make. And together, that aggregate of larger group of efforts put together is what changes the world. And it's important for us to realize that yes, we're tiny, but yes, what we do is important. And that dichotomy is wonderful to think about. And I think it affects you whether you're a Christian or not, or whatever religion you happen to be, is realizing that personal responsibility. This is one of the big things that we discuss on Patriarch Hours, our personal responsibility towards the communities that we live in, and towards the world, and towards our own future. And it really helps to have that. That is feeding our spiritual health to a large extent, is recognizing that.
Yeah. And the way that it ripples out, I think most profoundly for us in the way we have been created, in the way it works as humans, is through our procreative activities, through making a family. You know, you have 3 children, I have 2 children, and they are the recipients of our programming. You know, our sons look to us to see how to live, how to be a man. What kind of man am I going to be? And I know both my sons, at least at this point in their lives, both their sons want to grow up to be me. I'm the hero, and that's a fantastic time for me. It's a wonderful, tremendous responsibility for me. But you know, it's really easy for me to enjoy that as well, because all I have to do is encourage and just be the best that I can be, and involve them in that. So you know, when I come down to my gym here and I'm working out, my little guy, he picks up I've got the barbell with my 90 kilo deadlift set, and he gets the little dumbbell with 2 kilos on it, and he does deadlifts with me. But then I can look at him and I can go, wow, you can lift that with one hand, you are so strong, and just reinforce and encourage and make him feel excited and proud to be that kind of guy. And I'm getting in early, you know, like I didn't have I didn't have that with my dad quite so much because he was out, fighting bad guys as a cop. But I had a cop dad to look up to. That was pretty cool. So the way we show up for our children is how we then expand our influence in the world. Even though we are tiny and relatively insignificant compared to time and space, I have two sons, so I can double my influence in the world just through them. Not even thinking about other hierarchies or groups that I'm involved with or any of this work. Just my influence on them and what they could do for their children, and on it goes. So the family, I guess, is the next thing. The next sphere of responsibility and the sphere of influence that we have as men.
Absolutely. We need to look after our families, and it really starts with looking after our relationship with our wife. There is a tendency towards a very child-centric families. Basically, it ends up with the children running the family. And as fathers, we need to make sure that doesn't happen. The core of our family, the core of the family is us as men. We are the rock on which the family is built. But the home, you might say, that's on that rock in which the family inhabits is our wife. And we have to maintenance our wife, so to speak. We have to make sure she's well maintained. We have to make sure that she is well looked after. If you look at it, and I've had this discussion with men, and they'll say, it seems like as a man, you're putting in 80% of the effort and the wife is putting in 20. And I say, yes, probably, because now she has to put tons of effort into the children. The way it works is you look after your wife, she looks after the children. When you have no children, it's very 50-50 in far as effort goes. In fact, my experience is before children, the wife is doing perhaps even more work, because women are more conscientious about keeping houses clean and all that kind of stuff. Once you have kids, though, things shift. It is a lot of work to have small children. It's a lot of missed sleep. There's a lot of long nights. There's a lot of worry. Women worry way more about the kids than we do. We're throwing the kids up in the air and we're catching them and thinking it's a ball, and their hearts are beating and panicking. The kid falls down in another room and cries, and I'm like, I'm sure he's fine. If they cry for more than a minute, then it's a problem, and I'll go. And they hear the thud. They hear the thud, and right away, my child's dying, and they're running off to the kid. They live that, especially early childhood, so intensely. This is a lot of work for them, and it is a massive emotional and physical drain. And we as husbands need to build them up and keep them strong. And we need to set limits on them of where they spend their energy so that they don't burn themselves out. A lot of women are not particularly good at estimating things, including their own capacity. And they will push themselves too hard, too far, trying to do too many things, and then they'll burn themselves out. And as husbands, we need to look after them.
I hear stories sometimes about couples, married couples, where they get into that unfortunate cycle where they become verbally critical of each other instead of sort of walking forward together towards health and strength and the things that they want for their family. And they think that pointing out the problems and the errors and the mistakes that they're making in their lifestyle choices and pointing out that the wife's become overweight or whatever it is going to help. But often it just zings and hurts and creates friction in the relationship. But I've found, especially in this year, as I've been really getting myself in shape and looking after myself and making better decisions for me, the stronger I get physically, mentally, spiritually, the more I'm finding my wife is asking me to help her get on track in various ways. The more she's going, hey, can you help me to get more fit? And I'm like, great, come down to the gym with me and we'll work out together. We're going to do totally different regimes to each other because I'm going for bulk and strength. You're not. But let's work out at the same time, put on some music we both like, we'll make a date of it and we have a great time. But she comes to me and asks because I've got I'm not there yet, but I'm getting my shit more sorted. And that inspires her and also motivates her and makes her feel like, oh, he's getting ahead of me and we want to walk together. And that's a good thing, And in the political sphere, it's really come up in conversation with the nominee that Donald Trump's put forward for the Supreme Court seat, Amy Barrett. She, the mainstream media pointing out with absolute shock and horror that she's part of a fringe Christian group who believe that the man is the head of the household. Clutch the pearls. Every Christian believes this because it's what the Bible says, and because it is the demonstrable natural order. And I talked to my wife about this when it came up, and I was like, this, my experience of our relationship is that I am the head of the house. I lead. I have led us intellectually, spiritually, ideologically. I've led us. It's just how it's been. My wife has followed me naturally, but she is the heart of the family. I don't have that sensitivity that she has to the emotional needs of the children, or even myself or her, as much as she has. So we balance each other out. So if the man is the head of the household, naturally, the woman is the heart of the household, and they got to work together. And she agreed. She felt that was true too. So this idea that you both have to be everything. The division of spiritual labor is as real as the division of domestic labor is.
Absolutely. And you'll see that it changes as the kids get older. When they're very young, they mostly spend time, they need their mother more. Like my son says, I said, who do you like to hug more? And he says, I like to hug mom more. She's soft. She's soft, and that is what they want. They want that comfort. They need that nurturing that women provide much better than men. And then there gets to a point where they detach from the mother, and they want more and more to follow the father, because they're looking now for structure and order and guidance, and they want the hard edge. They want those limits that, not only are we physically harder than our wives, we're emotionally and intellectually harder as well. And harder,
the buck stops with us as a result, as far as discipline and that sort of thing goes.
It's not that harder is better. It's that it's more suited for different epochs in your life. When you're a baby, it doesn't work. You can't discipline a baby. They're not developed intellectually to the point where you can do that. The baby cries, you can't explain to the baby why he doesn't need to cry. You comfort the baby. That's all that you can do to communicate with them, is comfort them, take care of them. And so we each are well suited to different parts of the family's efforts, to different parts of child rearing. Men are more suited to dealing with the older children to a large extent, because my son, if he wants something, it's very hard for my wife to say no to him, because her motherly inclination is to give him everything that he desires. And that's fine. And that's great. And that's why I'm there to help put limits and boundaries on things. But it is important to look after our wives and make sure that they're well protected from the stresses in the world. One of the ways we can do that is to be careful not to blackpill our wives. Now, different women have different tolerances for how much political discussion of the world that they're interested in. And some women, when they have kids, I've noticed they really want to shut that down. They just don't want to talk about those subjects anymore. Maybe when the kids are older, they come back to it. The reason is that talking about stressful subjects increases our cortisol, increases our testosterone. That's why it's good for men. It's good for men to talk about these difficult things. But it does the same effect on women. And those, it will unbalance their hormones if they're dealing with and dwelling on subjects which are difficult, challenging, and perhaps are stressful to them. If they're dwelling on that too much time of the day, that can be very stressful. And a lot of women have come to me and say, how do I get my husband to stop talking about politics to me? I've had that question asked quite a bit. And so for men, be really careful. We don't have that emotional sensitivity, and we're perfectly fine with not being sensitive with other men. We don't need another man to be real sensitive to our emotional needs, because we're expected to be very explicit in our expressions. Women don't tend to be really explicit in their expression of their emotional needs. And so as men, we have to spend a bit of effort and have some conscientiousness that we're not stressing our wife up by what we're talking about. And some good examples are, we don't need to talk to her about everything that goes wrong in our work and in our business.
Mm.
You know, we can leave the negatives. We don't need to come home and complain about our job. That's not going to help our relationship with our wife. When we come home, we could say, yeah, I had a hard day at work, but that's life. You know, don't show that it's breaking you down. That is not good for your relationship.
They definitely don't need to hear about every internet argument you've had.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's not only usually pretty negative, it's also trivial and indicative of time wasting when you should be out slaying mammoths for them. So yeah, that's what I've learned. My wife made it very easy for me.
A lot of it
once told me, yeah, that's right. My wife made it really easy for me when she told me when we were talking about politics, in the last few years about the troubling changes that are happening. She made it clear that she is interested in hearing anything I want to talk to her about, so long as there's hope. And so I just have this little filter now that I don't talk to my wife about anything unless I'm asking the question, where's the hope? Where's the hope in this? And so now whenever we have great discussions, in the kitchen over the breakfast bench together, and I'll talk freely about anything that's going on in the world, so long as I know I'm in a state of mind and I have my focus on either the humor of it, or the hope in it. And the hope is easy as well when you believe in God and you're a Christian as I am, as she is. I can always just laugh at clown world now with her and go, oh well, we've got eternity, but this shit's crazy. But it's when I've had times of stress or despondency because of the things going on in my world or in the world at large, that I know that has a toxic effect not only on her but our relationship and our family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So keep the hope alive.
Sound went out a little bit.
Oh, good. Yours. You take it.
Yeah. So it is basically what women want is they want us. If we come to them with a problem, we need to have a solution. That's the hope. So what are we going to do about it? And if you're a man and you're not sure if what you're saying is hopeful or not, you need to ask yourself, is there something I can and will do about this? If not, don't need to talk about it. There are, men bring to other men a problem. You're working with another guy and you say, look, we've got this problem and I don't know how to solve it. Let's put our brains together and solve this problem. Excuse me. That's a discussion, when it comes to outside the family things. And inside the family, of course, you have those discussions with your wife, but for things that are external into the community, that are not her responsibility to deal with, it's our responsibility. We have those discussions with other men and not with our wives. And when it's within the family, even then, if possible, we should always be coming with a solution, even if it's not the best one. I find it works well. Let's go on a vacation and I will have at least an option. And I'll say, do you have any ideas that you would like to do? If I have no option, she feels stressed out by me coming to her and saying, I have this problem. Can you solve it? If I have an option, she has no problem giving ideas of where that could be improved. But at least something has been done. And part of it is that a lot of women, they don't feel confident in making a decision on behalf of the family, which is reasonable since we're supposed to be the ones leading and making those decisions. And when you come to them with an unsolved problem, a lot of women will interpret that as you're asking me to solve it.
Yeah. Or another thing that I learned early on in my marriage was actually I learned it on my honeymoon. So it was nice and early. When my wife on the third or fourth day in, she got annoyed at me and she was like, how about instead of you saying, do you want to go here? Do you want to do this? How about you just tell me what you want to do and lead? I was like, oh, hey, all right, you'll follow? Great, let's do this. And so men making executive decisions or confident suggestions of let's go do this, honey. Women love that confidence and that leadership. And on the topic of problems and solutions, I agree that it's important when you're unless it's one of those things where you need your wife to come up with the solution for some reason because it's her domain. If you bring a problem to your wife, have the solution or a solution in mind, but that doesn't actually necessarily apply the other way. And this is a hard learning curve for me. I still struggle with this one sometimes. When my wife comes to me with a problem, I immediately I've got plenty of solutions. I'll tell you all of them and I'll tell you what we can do to fix this right now. It's not what she wants.
Yep.
It's not what she wants in that moment.
do, and all you have to do as a man, you don't have to guess. Just ask her, would you like my help with this problem? And she'll tell you.
That's what I do now. Yeah. I
It-
just say
it's
now,
so-
are you venting? Do you just want me to hear you, or do you want me to try and help you solve this one? And I just ask that straight up now, because I can't pick it without her telling me, but she'll tell me honestly.
Yeah. No, a lot of things can be improved by very simple questions. And as men, one of the biggest issues is I mostly deal with this with men who aren't married and who are looking at getting married, is they'll say, this is unfair. There's one set of rules for me and one set of rules for her. And, you know, that is life. It's not fair. It isn't fair. There's a set of rules for husbands and a set of rules for wife, and there's overlap, you know, like honesty. Both sides must be honest. You know, you need to be loyal to each other. There are overlap in the rules, but there are some different rules for men than there are for women. And it's the way it is in nature. You know, the male lion has different responsibilities than the female lion.
Yeah,
and there is
and you know, if you're running away as a family from a saber-toothed tiger chasing after you, sorry guys, you're bigger and stronger. You're going to have to carry more children than your wife when you're in you know, when you're fleeing. That's just how it is. But would it be fair to, you know, to make your wife do just as much as you when you have that advantage to offer your family? You know, we just are what we are, and we have to show up with those talents and those natural abilities that we're given and use them as God intended us to.
Well, it's why, you know, some people say it's the only place, you know, within the family is the only place that communism works, because it's from each according to his ability and to each according to their need to a large extent. And when
it's like continually reciprocal within the family.
Yes,
that's
it is
the difference.
reciprocal. And what we have to understand too is, you know, we'll look at it with children because it's really easy to see. When children are little, they require a tremendous amount of attention. As they get older, the type of attention they require is different. It's less about their physical needs and more about their intellectual, social, spiritual, and emotional needs. But when children are older, they often look after their parents. And I've seen many, many cases where children spend a lot more time, resources, and energy looking after their elderly parents than was ever spent on them as children. You know, you're old for a long time. Most of my family lives close to 100, so they're old for about 30 years. You're only a child for about 15 years, and you're pretty self-sufficient by the time you're 15 or 16 if you were raised right. And so oftentimes, you know, it's not reciprocal on a day-to-day basis, but over your lifetime it is reciprocal. And that's the kind of vision that we need to have as men, is looking at over our lifetime. And to some degree, what we're doing for our wife and our children, we're not doing for our wife and our children. We're doing because we are part of a long chain going back to our ancestors that we owe them. They looked after each other in a chain coming up to us, and it's now our responsibility to continue on that work and continue it on into the future. And so we're doing it for our ancestors. We're doing it for our descendants. If you're a Christian, you're doing it because this is a commandment that you've been given by God, is to look after your family and lead them. And so it really helps when we're doing things which are difficult and may not feel fair, to understand that this is not about the moment that we're in. This is about, this has a long time horizon. And if we do lead correctly, we will see a reciprocity for our actions.
Absolutely. Now, this doesn't just apply to the family either. We've looked at the self and managing ourselves and looking after ourselves. You can't look after your family or anyone else if you're in bad shape. So, you know, start at the center, get yourself jacked and healthy and strong and spiritually centered, and, you know, right with God, and whatever you need to do to be a great leader and patriarch, and then look after your family. But beyond that, we've got our neighbors, we've got other people's families, we've got our brothers, we've got our sisters, and the community at large, and that's important too.
Yeah, and you know, for a lot of us, is going to start at church. For a lot of people who are going to a church, that's going to start at church. That is your primary community, and you're only a community when you share something that is fundamental. So you share fundamental values. You know, you can be a community based on, you share genetics, so you're from the same family or nation or whatever. But you have to have things that are shared, and the more things you share in common with that community, the easier it is to maintain community connections. And generally in church, you have quite a lot that's shared. You know, the traditional values. Yes, mentioning here traditional values, that'll be shared. You will share a way of arbitrating disputes between you, either through the church or through what it has in Matthew, talking about what to do when you have a problem with your brother. You share basically rules of living with a group of people. And so you need to invest into your church. Your church is not a place, someone mentioned churches are mostly cucked. Absolutely they are. And if you're going to a cucked church, that's your fault. You need to go find a better church. And if there isn't a better church, go find a bunch of other men and start one.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're at a loss for how to do that, at least start by coming and joining us at Champions of the Light. Now, the URL actually today that you see on the screen there is not functioning. I'm working on fixing that. But if you go to rrtv.live/COTL, Champions of the Light, you can come and join our online church and be part of our community and find people local to you and start to get together and do your own thing. But the church is just the body of Christ. It's just the people who believe in Jesus and, the way they get together and work together. So you can, form a new little Bible study group, if you need to, because there's nothing good around you. But I would also suggest if you want to find a church that's not cucked, try Orthodoxy. Check out your local Orthodox church. Look into it. It's worth it.
Absolutely. And invest into your church. A lot of people that are talking about religion, you hear a lot of the discussions about church. It's all what you get out of the church. And the whole mindset is what can I take? And if you have a community where the members take from the community and don't contribute, the community will go bankrupt. It will collapse. We ask, why are the churches mostly cucked? Because the uncucked churches weren't getting sufficient investment. We have exactly what we've been investing in. There are entities who have invested in encouraging churches to be cucked. Many of these are not even Christians. They're anti-Christian. They are sometimes of other religious groups, and they have invested into the undermining of the church. Well, to counter that, we have to invest into the building up of our church. A house divided cannot stand. So we need to be united with those who are in our church, and we need to invest in it. That's investing our time and our money and our effort and our emotions into it as well, like really loving our brothers in the church and not tolerating them or, they're there for what I can get out of them type thing. We need to look at it as, how can I help my brothers? How can I build up what's in the church? How can I contribute to it and be a good steward of the community in which I'm a part of? And if we do that, if enough men do that, and sometimes if there's not enough men doing that, the very first job you must do is encouraging other men to be part of the leadership, encouraging other men to become patriarchs, to look after their community. That might be, as basically we're doing now, that might be the job that's necessary. But build up your church. Otherwise, you have no right to complain about not having a strong church if you're not investing into your local community and local church or doing something to improve it. So that's number one. And another important thing is to network with other men. And these men don't have to be in our church. It's networking with other men. And this is more in a, you could say it's not necessarily religious. It's more in a secular cooperation. We need to cooperate with other men. Nations are formed when groups of people who are very closely related, actually. A nation, natal, it comes from it means born together or born of the same basic stock. So if you have a nation of people, they're only really a nation if they cooperate. That's what defines the difference between tribalism and you start getting into nations, is they start to cooperate on a larger scale. And many of us that watch this show, we have the capacity to take a fairly large role in leadership. But there are other men that can't do that. And so you go and you find men to follow. And this is not about being a sheep. This is about allying with other men, federating with them, and recognizing that some men are better at leading than you are, and supporting those men. One of the
we've done an episode on the sociosexual hierarchy, And I would recommend, if anyone watching this hasn't checked that out, go back to one of our previous episodes. Can't remember which number, but the understanding the ways in which men organize themselves naturally. The sociosexual hierarchy is just one way of looking at it, one way of analyzing male behavior in groups. But ultimately, if you're not naturally a leader, and you don't actually get to decide if you're a leader, by the way, the men around you decide if you're a leader, and you'll know because men will naturally follow you if you're a natural born leader. And if you're not, then you can again find a guy who you admire to work with and place yourself in his hierarchy. And this is how nations become great, when they have functional, stable hierarchies of men.
Yes, historically, what happened in Europe was you had the manorial system. So you would have within your community the lord or the duke, or depending on what level of status he had, there would be this hierarchy under him. There would be it's a trifunctional system. So there were 3 levels of society. There was the producers, which were the bulk of people that made the things that were necessary for life. There was the warrior caste that would protect them. And then there was the very tiny leadership caste at the top, the alphas, which make up 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000 men. And this system allowed everyone to have a place in which they functioned adequately. They functioned well. And today we're all kind of mushed into this group. We're no longer, very often we're no longer defended by a true warrior class. We have government bureaucrats with guns, and then we have many people who should be in the warrior class stuck in some production class where they're completely unhappy. And we have people who should be in the production class unemployed because we have a manipulated economic system. So if we network with other men, it's not just about being in a hierarchy for our own benefit. The fact is that network gives us so much more potential to find our place in society and we need to start creating parallel societies. The society that we live in is corrupt and failing and collapsing. And we need to build these parallel societies so that when the official society collapses, there is something to replace it, and not a total vacuum of power that leads to destruction and death until some strong man comes along and wields together the most psychopathic followers possible to get control of everything, because that's what happens if we don't have strong communities.
Yep, that's right. And I would say, I hammered this point quite a bit on this show and my other shows, but it's important for these hierarchies and these groups and these communities to be in real life. You can make friends on the internet, and you can encourage and support each other. And I've never met Noah face to face. We've never stood in a room together, but we work well together, and we encourage men well together. But we're not going to be much use to each other when they turn off the power. We're not going to be much use to each other when the boogaloo begins in one country or another. And so having men around you physically, neighbors, locals, people in the same town or city as you, who you know and trust and who you collaborate with. And it's not just from the sort of militia and defense perspective. That's one thing that men do, but also, as you say, the production, having, knowing who in your community is the blacksmith, knowing who in your community is the tailor, knowing who in your community can perform these roles that we will need when we become when we're no longer able to depend on the international system of trade that we are slaves to. When this collapses, we're going to need local artisans and producers and food producers, farmers especially. Get to know your local farmers and growers, because they are incredibly important people who have really copped a lot of disrespect and a lot of they've been forgotten. People have forgotten how much work is being constantly put into the earth so that the masses can be fed, and they're getting screwed over by the international corporate systems and the supermarket. The mega corporate food system is really hurting our farmers. So get to know your local farmer and find out how you can support him, and build your communities locally in real life. It's very, very important. And at least at the very starting point, know your neighbors, who lives to your left, who lives to your right, who lives behind you, and who lives across the street. Know every single one of those families. Take them something nice. Go and ask them for a cup of sugar. Whatever you have to do, open that dialogue and start to find ways that you can serve them knowing that you can call on them when you need them as well.
Absolutely. You know, and a big part of that is being part of maintaining our local commons. You know, if we're in a neighborhood, and you know where I live, it's a dead end off a dead end, which is nice. We don't have a lot of traffic, and if I see garbage on the floor, I'll pick it up. I'll clean up my commons. I will verbally and loudly discourage people from letting their dogs poop everywhere, which is a huge problem here in Portugal. So if you are a force for good in your commons, you will get respect from the people that matter. The people who are parasitical on the commons will not respect you, but they don't respect you anyway. You're not. All they do is learn to fear you and avoid, which can be a great thing. You almost don't know they exist after a while because they see you and they just go the other direction. And those, though, that are perhaps too shy to say something, they're going to not respect. They're going to be thankful for what you've done, and you will quickly find the other men that are like you. You know, I quickly discover that my neighbor is like me because we'll go both and stand in front of our house, not wearing masks, catching some sunlight at the middle of the day, and we get into a discussion about how stupid the mask and the lockdowns are. You know, this is
nice. There's a brother right there.
Yeah, you immediately can recognize your brothers. You know who in your neighborhood, and he'll tell me, yeah, and then there's a good guy down there, and that building over there, there's a great guy there. That's a guy. If there's problems, the reality is it's about 10% of men, when there's trouble, are going to do anything, and the rest of the people are going to do what they're told. And you need to know who that percent of men are.
I had a great experience, and I felt very, very gratified at the success of my influence over a dear friend of mine who lives locally. I was at his house with my family. We were hanging out all day. I was helping him build at his place, and it was great fun. But then it was a suburban area, and down the end of the street was this family of what we call in Australia, we call them bogans, you know, low socioeconomic, uneducated, rough people who, you know, there's alcohol abuse evidently, and the father isn't really doing his job and the kids are just running wild. And so one of the teenagers hops in a low riding car with his girlfriend or whatever, and just decides to start fishtailing down the street and leaving skid marks. And my son happened to be climbing a light pole out the front. And this car comes along, and I was just like, son, get inside now. And he jumped straight off the lawn, ran to the house, and he was safe, which was great. But my friend, this was his domain, you know, and we're both standing there with arms crossed out the front, watching, you know, giving a death stare to this teenager as he drives by, endangering the lives of the locals. And so I turned to my friend and I was like, what are you going to do about this, mate? That's not cool. This is your neighborhood. You going to let that happen? And he's like, well, what should I do? So we talked it out, and I encouraged him to start a local militia. And he immediately did. He went across the road, he figured out, oh yeah, I know that guy in that house. I know that guy. He's a bit older, but he gets it. He's a trustworthy guy. And he went and immediately, I was very impressed. He took immediate action. He rallied a group of 4 men. And within a couple of days, they were knocking on the door of that house and letting them know. You know, he showed up with a group and let this family know that this was not going to be allowed in the neighborhood. And they haven't had a problem since. And it didn't get ugly, and there was no threats made. It was just like, and this was my direct advice to him. I just said, look, if you show up at the door and say we've got a problem, you may start a fight with this neighbor, and it's not going to be good for the neighborhood. It's not going to make things better. But if you show up with 4 or 5 guys who are in agreement with you, and you just really politely, really kindly, really pleasantly say, hey, you know, this is a family area. We've got kids here. We really can't have this stuff going on. You're going to stop, right? Just the presence of a group of men who are standing in unison against one is enough. And I believe it was. And and he felt great. He felt very empowered, and he felt like he was cleaning up his commons, and he really was. So simple actions in lockstep with other men can be far more effective than you know, trying to be gung-ho or be a hero or even calling the cops. It's not necessary at that point. You can deal with it yourself, and it's far more powerful if you know, people don't fear the cops because the cops are far away until they're not, until someone calls them. But if you've got a whole street full of men who are watching you, there's a bit of fear there. You're going to behave yourself.
And most people instinctually know that the cops, they rely on cooperation of the local neighborhood to do anything. They're completely powerless in a neighborhood where people don't cooperate with them.
Mm.
The government knows this, to the fact that they put a tremendous amount of effort into propagandizing and creating fear of police amongst people in order for people to comply. But if you see in neighborhoods where, a lot of immigrant neighborhoods, they want to be independent, and they want to have their own sovereignty, and they want to deny the police power over them, so they don't cooperate with them. And the police are completely ineffective in those neighborhoods. They can't find anybody they look for. They can't solve any crime they want to solve unless the neighborhood agrees that they're allowed to solve that crime.
Yeah.
We have a tremendous amount of power over, if we're united and we work together and we cooperate with other men, we federate with them, we have a tremendous amount of sovereignty. And sovereignty is the ability to deny others power over you.
Mm.
We often don't exercise that, partially because we're not networked with other men. We don't know our neighbors. And partially because we're propagandized to believe that that's impossible, to truly fear the government. The reality is the government fears us. That's why they spend so much effort. That's why we have far more police than are necessary to solve the actual crimes against natural law that exist in our country, and why they will spend so much effort, say, policing, mask laws and things like this, and so very little effort policing actual crimes, is because they are afraid of us, and they know that if we are capable of getting together and cooperating, and if we start to believe in our own moral legitimacy as men, as mature men, good men, we're going to have that ability to deny them power over us. And they're afraid of that, because if we can deny them power over us in a small thing, we can deny them power over us in a big thing. We can decide we don't like paying taxes anymore, whatever it happens to be. And they're afraid of us recognizing our own power. And so networking with other men is extremely important for that, not just for when there is a collapse, but as a power balance to the government. The government will take every ounce of power it can from us. It will enslave us to the point where we say no more. That is the limit of government overreach. They're not limited by a constitution. They can't be. It's just a piece of paper. They can't be limited by their own rules. They have no ethics and morals, so they can't be limited by those.
In America, they're just going to stack the Supreme Court if they get Biden in, and they're going to rewrite the Constitution. They don't give a shit about any of its current rules.
It's all pill pull and work around it. They'll just go around it and do what they want anyway. And in some cases, there are laws in the U.S. which are clearly unconstitutional, which have been around for almost 100 years, and they've been challenged in court and swept under the rug. And
I would say there are amendments to the Constitution which are unconstitutional, which need to be readdressed. Yeah.
Exactly. So what does stop government overreach, and what ensures good governance, and this is an issue for all men who have invested into their commons, whether you be poor or whether you be rich, you need to have rule of law in your country, or everything you have can be taken away from you in an instant by some government bureaucrat who doesn't like you. And the winds change suddenly, and you're on the wrong side of things, and you're screwed. So as men, we have to have that alternative balance to power, is the power that comes between men who are united in their own communities. We need that in order to maintain sovereignty.
And I think the other important aspect to that community building among men is the way that it affects the family. For starters, women love it and feel a great sense of security when they see that their man is surrounded by other strong, decent men. And secondly, the reality is that if anything happens to you as the head of the house, as the man of the house, wouldn't you and everyone feel a lot better if you knew that there were other strong men around who could step up and look after your family for you and protect them if ever you were taken out of the picture for some reason? So that your community of men becomes an insurer of last resort for your family.
Absolutely. And I'd rather be insured by men that I know and trust and rely on than insured by a government somewhere that can suddenly change the laws and decide that my family's not important anymore. A lot of people, their insurance of last resort is the government. And the government loves that because it means that they have power and control over you. They can keep you controlled through a fear that you're going to lose. A large reason for the lockdowns has been that probably worldwide they're going to try to implement some sort of a universal basic income program. And essentially everyone understands that's moronic. However, if you're starving to death at home and you haven't been allowed to work for a year, it starts to become
You'll
more.
take it. You'll
You'll
take the money. Yeah.
take it because you need to survive.
Mm.
And thus comes in communism. That's essentially what UBI is. It's a backdoor communism.
And it's paving the way, and they're starting to already promote it in the propaganda rags about the sharing economy and the idea of I saw an article the other day saying by 2030 you won't own anything, and you can tell that that's going to include your family.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of government bureaucrats in the education system that will freely tell you that you don't own your children, the government owns them. Now, the reality is, if the government
come and take them,
came to your house and took your children away, what are you going to do about it? Nothing, because you're not. I mean, maybe you and I will, but men who are not networked with other men, who don't have the capacity to violently take their children back if necessary from being kidnapped by the state, they don't own their children. The state
and no man can do that on his own. That's the crucial factor.
No. In fact, you have to be networked with other men, because the reality is you probably shouldn't be involved in the operation to take your kids back, because you're going to be the very first one that the police knock on the door, and you should be able to go, I don't know anything about it. And
you also may not have as much restraint as people who are a bit more detached emotionally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't. You wouldn't want to see me. I don't think I would. I don't think I'd have much restraint if anyone was harming my children.
And if people don't believe that's possible, go look on YouTube. There's all kinds of videos from the last few weeks of the police. A lot of it in Australia, some in other places, where there is a mother and the child protesting. They come and arrest the mother, and social workers take the kid away. They've just kidnapped your kid. And you can say, oh yeah, but they gave the kid back later. Oh, so you're okay with them kidnapping them for shorter periods of time? That's how they get you, that slippery slope.
And a lot of what we're experiencing in the changes and the implementation of authoritarian practices in this so-called emergency in the world today is just practice. It's a testing ground for how much power and control can we take. And this is why they're starting to roll out more and more propaganda to push us towards acceptance of communism. Is all of this is a testing ground. Whether or not the virus is real, they are using it as a testing ground for a total global authoritarianism, and all of our political leaders are really just playing along with it. There are very few voices who are actually speaking out against it, and those few voices are the ones that we need to lift up.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting that there's even, for example, here in Portugal, there is an organization, Doctors for Truth. And they've come out saying that there's no epidemiologists. These are people that study the spread of diseases. There's no epidemiologist in history that would ever recommend quarantining healthy people. That is absolutely moronic and actually increases the spread of disease by keeping people packed together in small spaces. And if you're quarantined in an apartment building with 100 units, that's the same as being quarantined in a house with all those people, because the air does flow in between the units. And the common spaces where you have to go to get your mail and take your garbage out, those are all contaminated if anyone in the building is contaminated. So the reality is we should be only quarantining the sick, and they should be quarantined away from the healthy, and the healthy should be allowed to go about their life. And even then, that only applies in diseases which kill people at a higher rate than this. This is barely worth even noting. It's basically less lethal than your average cold that we have every year, your cold and flu season. So what they're looking for is they're looking for men to network together and say no more. That's what the government is waiting for. They're waiting for us to say no more. And as long as we don't say it, they'll keep taking stuff from us.
Yeah, kind of like little toddlers will just keep on testing the boundaries until they hit a hard one. And when they hit a hard one, then they go, okay, this far, no further. I won't do that again. And
morally, a lot of these people are only as developed as toddlers. They don't understand. This is hard for us to recognize that many of the people in government literally do not understand the difference between right and wrong. All they understand is that they have a consequence for an action. That they can kind of comprehend. I did something and this didn't work out. I'll do something different next time. They don't. They're essentially psychopaths, and they many of them aren't even very intelligent psychopaths, but they're psychopathic, and they work based on consequences. And if we create no consequences for them, we are, to them, the signal they receive is, oh, you want more oppression. I mean, if you didn't, you do something about it, I guess you like it. There must be a demand for oppression. I should oppress you more. You seem happy.
But we're waking up. We're feeling the pressure. We're all feeling the pinch. This is why people are watching this. This is why people are seeking, answers to these questions. This is why many men are hitting the gym. And to circle back to where we started about the self-care, it's men are realizing that their personal efficacy, physically, spiritually, and mentally, is going to be the insurer of last resort for certainly for yourself, but for your family and for your community. And the more that every man can stand up and take personal responsibility for all in that sphere, the more that we can decide how the fate of our nations goes, and decide the future. We can take things back, but it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. We're very, very weakened as a nation and as a people and as men in this modern time. But I'm so excited by these changes and this threat. This threat that is upon us, that normies are beginning to wake up to in a really important way. It's an exciting time, because with this awakening comes action. And we're seeing, I saw a great, Sven shared with me a great picture of PewDiePie, who sort of, skinny, nerdy, funny Swedish gamer guy who's got this huge sphere of influence. Now he's jacked. He's got a six-pack, and he's in boxing gear, and he's manning up too, because he feels it, he gets it. And it's so important for anyone in a position of influence, whether it's tiny like ours or massive like PewDiePie's, to be encouraging and taking the lead in that way. And I guess, did we cover everything you wanted to cover tonight, Noah?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add the one last thing. I agree. When I talk about how things are, I'm talking about it with an excitement, because the reality is we had this period in the 90s up until 2011 where things were so good that everyone fell asleep. And we need struggle as human beings, especially men. Men need struggle. We need something to fight against. We need something to fight for and something to fight against. We need difficulty. We need challenge in life. And yeah, we're getting plenty of it now. And you see the results that men are improving themselves. The men who will improve themselves are doing it, and the men who won't are collapsing. And so there's this bifurcation of society, and it will bifurcate until there becomes the men who survive and the men who don't. And that's what's going. And I don't mean that they're going to necessarily die, but they won't reproduce. And there'll be the men that do reproduce and do have families. And that's really the long-term way that we change society, is by having families and raising children and raising them to follow in our example. Well, those who are picking unsuccessful paths don't have kids, don't reproduce, don't leave anything to the future, and their ideas die with them. And this is long-term how we decide what the future of society is. The last thing I wanted to do was plug our merch. Don't forget to plug our
yeah, that's right. That's what I was ramping up to. So, we've got to also get the memes out there. We need to normalize these ideas, because what we're doing here, Noah and I, is so taboo to so many people, especially those who've been heavily corrupted by the message of feminism, that they're not gonna watch. They're just gonna assume that we're misogynists and all of these other things. So we need to do what we can to normalize it, and you guys can help us by wearing the meme. So we have a shirt now. We have an official uniform. Let's show it. The patriarchy is returning. Be part of it.
It's a really nicely fitted shirt too.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it, especially as it gets tighter. in all the right ways. And you can grab those at rrtv.live. We have a merch store there. We've got t-shirts for all the programs that we're doing. There'll be more coming, but yeah, this is my favorite one, and I love wearing this around my local town, which is pretty feminized sort of region, pretty lefty, pretty normie. You get a few little looks like, is he really wearing a shirt that says the patriarchy is returning? What is that? But we can, you put these things on your body and you wear them around your town, and it begins to normalize. People begin to get used to the idea, and they get less terrified by it. So, it's not just good fashion. It's also important to restore the commons, to start putting these ideas in people's faces.
Absolutely. It's like ripples on a pond. Every time we put these ideas out there, we're changing things bit by bit, and the accumulated changes are what's going to change society.
I would especially love to see women wearing these shirts. They do come in ladies' sizes as well. So Margot, please go and grab your Patriarch Hour T-shirt and wear it proudly, and let all the all the normie women around you freak out for a while until they get used to it.
Absolutely. And that is an interesting point. Women's support of the patriarchy is extremely important for the continuation of it, because it is women who set the attitudes that young children have towards their fathers. Has a lot to do with the attitude that the mother expresses towards the father, and makes a big difference in how they end up seeing male authority in the future.
Absolutely. Well, we can all do our part, and even the little stones make a ripple, and if we're all throwing them in, we can make waves eventually. So let's all do it together and restore that great idea of a male-led society, with women honored and protected and loved and cherished for their absolutely vital and pivotal role in making this all possible. We cannot do it without you ladies. And Noah and I, we love our wives, and we love our friends' wives, and we want to look after them and protect them and be the insurer of last resort for them as well. This is what it's all about, and this is what is missing. This is why we have to stop being so dependent on the government teat, and we have to be committed to our marriages, and committed to the quality of our families, and committed to the quality and the uplifting of our neighbors' families, and get involved and help your fellow man, help your brother man to be the best patriarch that he can be. We're going to make the West great again if we do this.
Amazing, James. Thanks for that.
Great stuff. Thanks, Noah. Excellent to chat with you again. This is the 18th episode of Patriarch Hour, and with any luck, we'll be back next week with the 19th.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Take care, brother.
Bye-bye.
See you, folks.